Welcome to App Talk with Upptic, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of how to grow apps and games. We speak with industry experts about specific strategies, tools, and tactics they use to find success, and we keep you up to date with emerging news and trends in the ever-changing games, marketing, and technology ecosystem. My name is Xander Agosta, Director of Marketing at Upptic, and joining me today are my co-host,
Warren Woodward, co-founder of Upptic.
And our guest,
Manu Gambhir, co-founder of Snapyr.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us, Manu.
My pleasure.
Yeah. Our first section is Industry Insights, where we do a deep dive in industry news, a few articles for us to cover. The first one is basically a follow-up from the last 2 weeks, an ongoing discussion we've had around Unity, AppLovin, and IronSource. They finally sort of put this to rest. I'll read. Warren, do you want to cover this one quickly?
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, we've got an article from Benzinga, which is the next and probably final chapter in this game of musical chairs. So yeah, the headline is Unity Board of Directors reaffirms commitment to IronSource transaction and rejects unsolicited proposal from AppLovin. So just a quick couple of pull quotes here. Unity announced that its board of directors has completed a thorough financial and strategic evaluation of the unsolicited proposal from AppLovin. IronSource transaction is expected to deliver significant benefits for shareholders and position combined company for increased value creation. Unity board determines AppLovin proposal would not reasonably be expected to result in a superior proposal to Unity's agreement with IronSource. So basically says, thanks, Unity saying thanks, but no thanks to AppLovin for the unsolicited proposal and is proceeding as planned with the IronSource merger. Xander, I know you've been tracking this super closely. I'd love to just cede time to you to kind of explain what you think about this move from Unity. Was it wise of them to reject this from AppLovin? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm sort of two minds here. When I think about just the power of a combined Unity AppLovin entity, it just seems like that would be the most anti-competitive, holistic set of tools that could possibly exist in the games industry, specifically the mobile games industry. And to that end, it seems just like an obvious dominant combination that would be really, really accretive to shareholders and very high value. That being said, one of the main drawbacks of that is the merger is very different, structured very differently than the IronSource merger, in that in the IronSource merger slash acquisition, Unity retains 73-ish% control of the combined entity, whereas in the AppLovin Unity merger, they would control 49% of voting rights, so they'd be a minority voting shareholder. And so I think when I think about why this went through, I really think that this is more they want to have more control rather than actually not believing that the combined entity would be more powerful. I think one of the key components, there's a few key components of the AppLovin pie that are missing from the new joint, basically the acquisition of IronSource. The obvious ones are an attribution provider like Adjust, which has a ton of really critical data, which AppLovin can use and would be really meaningful to Unity if in that sort of joint merger, as well as a few of the other fraud and other products they have. So when this all comes said and done, I think this is going to have a fine outcome for both IronSource and Unity. And I guess my thought is there going to be some other dance down the line where they try and do a merger once AppLovin struggles a little bit now that they're if they are potentially in a less dominant position down the line? So those are
that's
thoughts.
Interesting. You see it all coalescing to just one dominant player in the in-app SDK rewarded video space?
I think just based on what trends we're seeing with Apple and Google consolidating, you really are going to need, in terms of their value with like building their own networks and such, I think that's the only way you're going to compete. And so either they get snapped up by a bigger company, someone like a Google or a Facebook or someone, or you're just going to consolidate down so you have this one entity because you're going to need enough data to compete with with all these different companies. So whether or not that happens on the line, we'll see. But I would see that as a possible outcome. I don't know what AppLovin's end of life story is otherwise, which is maybe 5 or 10 years down the line.
You see that happening, Xander, before Unity invests in retention on their platform. They're helping the players build the games, the app developers build the games, now monetize, acquire players, but how about keeping them as well?
Manu, what do you see that play would be?
I mean, there's a number of opportunities within the space right now, but there's none, and this is kind of why Snapyr, but when we're a startup at this stage, but there's none that's like explicitly focused on gaming and the unique ecosystem that surrounds that. I saw Unity's they made some acquisitions that are small acquisitions. They're trying to build some in-house platforms there. But it's not a small undertaking.
Yeah.
And so I see as part of the 360-degree strategy of like, hey, we help you build the app, we help you acquire players, we help you monetize the players, but we also help you keep them. That's going to be part of the story.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. We've seen all of this M&A activity the last few years, but I mean, to date, the major players in like retention and re-engagement marketing have not been subject to this. And yeah, that is probably some opportunity.
Yeah, and I guess the question we'll see is, do they try to build something in-house, or do they try and Snapyr something up? Cool. Go ahead.
Noted.
Awesome.
Okay.
Shall we go on to the next story?
Yeah, so this is just an article from Pew Research Center, which I thought was interesting, and a few things I wanted to touch on. It's kind of a long pull quote, so I'll try and read it quickly but clearly. This is Teens, Social Media and Technology 2022. A new Pew Research Center survey of American teens finds TikTok has skyrocketed into popularity since North America debuted several years ago and is now the top social media platform. Some 67% of teens say they've ever used TikTok, with 16% of all teens saying they've used it almost constantly. Meanwhile, the share of teens who say they use Facebook has plummeted from 71 to 32% over the previous 8 years. YouTube tops the 2022 teen online landscape among platforms covered in the new survey, as it is used by 95% of teens. TikTok is on the list that is asked. TikTok is next on the list that were asked about in this survey, with 67%, followed by Instagram and Snapchat, which were both 6 in 10 teens, and then further down the list are Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, WhatsApp, Reddit, Tumblr, and a few others who are even further down that. So the thing that's really obvious that anyone who's been paying attention to the segment at all knows is TikTok is growing the fastest out of all social apps. The thing that really surprised me out of this data is the adoption of YouTube in the younger generation. Yeah. And that's probably the most interesting pull quote and pulled out of this. And when you sort of think about what TikTok is doing, it's making social media decreasingly social and increasingly broadcast. And so it actually kind of does follow logically that YouTube, not Facebook, will be its primary competitor, and sort of all the algorithms YouTube have in background are already working towards this. And we have some interesting data that we can talk about in a little bit for us at Upptic. But what do you guys think about this?
Well, I mean, the obvious thing that jumps, well, there's two things. I mean, none of these trends sound too surprising. I'd say the specific ordering of YouTube on top does jump out. But for us in the media buying landscape, like doing UA work and managing relationships with these channels, like this trend has been clear for a while, but it's nice to have like new updated numbers around it. I didn't realize adoption with younger generation was that low now for Facebook. Like now it's more likely than not that for a young person is not on Facebook. Like it's a clear minority now. Yeah, the other interesting thing is like what do TikTok and YouTube have in common? Like they were built from the ground up as video native platforms.
Yeah, I agree. No, I think, I mean, video is clearly taking over. I mean, on Facebook, my poll sample is my 18-year-old daughter. It looks like, when I talked to her about Facebook, as if she ate some rotten food. That's I think a general reaction to that. But for me, guy who's like been very focused on product design, my background actually primarily has been in real money online gambling apps, so slot machines, poker, all that kind of stuff. But when I used TikTok, it's a slot machine, right? Not just kind of in the way it functions, but very specifically in the way it's designed and the experience it gives. It goes back to those, B.F. Skinner experiments with the pigeons and all of that. And I think that's working extremely well to hook people, right? This goes back to, if you've seen these books by Natasha Schull from MIT, Addicted by Design, I think it's called. These are the design patterns that I think are appealing to this generation. I mean, it's exciting in some ways. It's also kind of scary as a parent in some ways, how effective these algorithms are. Just diverting a little bit. I mean, it reminds me of, I guess this was like 15 years ago. You guys might remember there was this algorithm called CompuGotcha, right? And you know that one?
No.
CompuGotcha was an algorithm used in a bunch of Japanese games, and it got so addictive that kids were skipping school, stealing money, that the government banned the algorithm. It's the first time ever that an algorithm got banned.
Oh, is this essentially what powered like the first era of gotcha games? Then okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So I think we're just getting to this point where, algorithms and behavioral design can be hacked to such a point we get people to consume whatever we want. So a little scary, but if used with good content, it's fine.
Yeah. I think that piece you just said, good content, is fine. I mean, I think just to sort of double click on what you mean by TikTok being a slot machine, I think one of the main hooks of TikTok is anyone can upload a video, and every once in a while they get one that goes super viral. And in that regard, it's like the dopamine hit that's very similar to what social casino would do, or even going to a literal casino and pulling the ringer. I mean, if you've heard the podcast before, I think TikTok is one of the most dangerous things in the world, especially for Western democracies. And I have no issue with banning I think we should be banning TikTok out of at least the United States, but that's a different conversation for a different time. And I mean, clearly there's precedent where people, informed governments have made that decision before. So
yeah, that's a whole podcast unto itself.
For sure.
We keep dancing around it, and every time I say it, Warren shakes his head at me, and we'll have to actually do a deep dive on it at some point. Get someone from TikTok on to defend it. Okay, let's roll on to the next topic.
Yeah, up next, we have some news relative to Reddit and Web3. So this is from CoinDesk. The headline is Reddit rolls with Arbitrum to scale its Ethereum-based community point system. So for a little info, community points, which are ERC20 tokens that can be earned by Reddit users for quality comments or other contributions, can be spent on things such as exclusive badges, custom emojis, and GIFs. In a statement, Reddit said Arbitrum, a project of New York's Off-Chain Labs, was the most promising scaling technology for community points, citing the fact that Arbitrum is decentralized, developer-friendly, and has broad ecosystem support. Reddit said Thursday that Arbitrum beat out 21 other entrants to become the winner of its scaling bake-off. The other projects being considered include Solana, Starkware, and Polygon, to name a few. And then I just had a side note that while he's no longer the current CEO, Reddit founder Alexis Ohanian, I think, was a very early and hardcore Web3 adopter, and is currently still very active as an advocate for the space. So not too surprising to see Reddit as one of the larger social media channels to make some practical usage of Web3 technology. I'm a little curious to see how community adoption of this will be. I think like the bull case for this is just like people don't even know that it's largely like a blockchain driven system, other than a minority that chooses to engage in that way. But what do you all think of this, of the idea of community points being fully tokenized and tradable, and using Arbitrum? Like I will say, like, Arbitrum has been one of the side chains that I've seen making the most focus on gaming and low cost transactions, so it is a natural fit from that capacity. But yeah, guys, what do you think on this?
It's like a Redditism. Can you explain this like I'm five? Like, I'm not sure I understand what exactly this means. Like, what exactly the implication of this is.
Yeah, so and I've pulled away. I used to use Reddit heavily, so I'm a little unclear on like how much of this is current versus future looking. But ERC20 token is essentially like any fungible tradable token. So
got that part.
Specifically of Ethereum or an Ethereum compatible chain.
Right.
So it sounds like with this decision, anyone who's done transactions on Ethereum knows that it's fairly high cost to do transactions. This is the whole advent of things like sidechains, of ZK rollups, but essentially like layers built on top of existing Ethereum technology to make things more efficient and low cost for transaction. So Reddit's goal here was to vet a bunch of different solutions, and for what they know needs to be like a high volume, low cost transaction network, to find like which of these competing solutions is going to be best for their community. Because if someone is going to buy or sell community points, like they probably want to be spending a couple dollars max on that. They don't want to be spending $5 and paying $20 in gas fees, which is what they would do if they didn't use a layer 2 solution like Arbitrum.
Which of the theory is, I can post on Reddit, I'll get upvotes, and then those translate into this currency. Is that sort of how it would work? Is that my understanding?
That I think that's core to the the underlying
I think
system.
that's the gist of it. I mean, I got involved a while ago. This is going back 3 years, 4 years in this platform called Steemit. I don't know if you guys came across that. I was
haven't.
just totally hooked on that thing. It was an experiment on the merger of what we now call Web3 and Reddit. You post content, people upvote the content. If the more people who upvote it, the more money you earn in the form of their ERC tokens, which at the time were called Steem. That eventually forked off to something now called Hive. It worked phenomenally well. People who were upvoting would get rewards for early on predicting content that would rise to the top. I would have a certain limited amount of kind of upvote tokens. So if I spent them on something that didn't pan out to be good content, that was a net loss to me. And if I invested it into something that turned out to be great content, just like picking stocks, I earned a very good return on investment on that, and as well as the actual author of the content. And so my experience there, both as a contributor, as an author in the platform, and as a reader, was that by and large, for an early stage experiment, it worked really well. Like, good content did bubble to the top. And it was crazy. People were making for, things they were writing in the early days, a few $1,000s a post in a couple of weeks, right? And so, it also brought about all these conversations about, hey, this is a new form of income for authors. And so the whole thought at that point was, how can this become, the kind of driving technology behind perhaps a Reddit or other types of news platforms that are, community contributed content. So for me, it's like great to see this is actually coming together. I've kind of lost touch with this whole world. I've been focused on my startup, but somewhat aware of this happening. So I'm not too familiar with Arbitrum's exact mechanisms as compared to Steem or Hive, but I believe they're similar. My guess is people aren't going to really know it's like associated with blockchain or anything. They're just going to see like, hey, I earn tokens and I can go sell them for my work in promoting or writing content, right? And that's great.
Yeah. I think the real test of this will be, I mean, I think as a system to reward great content creation, absolutely, it's a no-brainer. The question is, will these points have any market value? Like, there has to be two sides to a trade, right? Is there some compelling reason that someone will want to buy these? I think part of why Reddit's current kind of like community reward system has worked is like it's always earned, right, for the most part. But I guess I'm contradicting myself, because people do purchase like Reddit Gold and reward that to other content creators. So I think maybe it's an ecosystem that is somewhat trained for this already. So it could work better than I imagine here.
Well, and I've had a rant a little while. Everything is a metaverse. I mean, Reddit is a metaverse, right? And people care about the social aspect and the social signaling aspect of Reddit incredibly much so, to the point where they have skins and Reddit Gold, and they kill themselves metaphorically to do high volume post content. So I mean, this makes sense. Once you described it, Manu, I mean that function, now I'm like all on board. I think this seems like if it's not Reddit, someone else will do that and it'll attain a large scale. Okay, let's keep going because we have still a lot to cover. All right, so I'll quickly touch on Disney earnings. We've been doing a lot of earnings recently, but just quickly touch on Disney earnings because there is this one interesting component I want to talk about. So from the Disney earnings PDF, revenue for the quarter increased 26%. Diluted earnings per share from continued operations for the quarter increased to 77 cents from 50 cents the prior quarter. Here's a quote from Bob Chapek, the CEO. "We had an excellent quarter with our world-class creative and business teams powering outstanding performance at domestic theme parks, big increase in live sports viewership, and significant subscriber growth at our streaming services. With 14.4 million Disney Plus subscribers added in the fiscal third quarter, we now have 221 million total subscribers across our streaming offerings. So that's a component I really wanted to call out, was how Disney has eclipsed Netflix in terms of streaming subscriber numbers. And that's a pretty huge development. It was not obvious that that would happen in the short term. They're a little bit cheating because they have Hulu, they have Disney Plus, and they have ESPN Plus, but they're because they have all the information internally, they're able to duplicate these numbers. So it is a true, a true user count. And then I guess when you just think about the business overall, the streaming business, the insurgent streaming business, plus the resurgent park business, plus the ongoing revenue stream from linear television. I mean, Disney is such an incredible operator, and the fact they've been operating for 200 years is, it says enough. I don't know. Any thoughts about this development, specifically the streaming side?
I did not realize they'd passed Netflix and subscriber growth. Yeah.
In like what, a year? Like, it's crazy.
Right. I think that's the most impressive part of this, is like how quickly they became the leading service.
I mean, it's crazy to me that they're still growing subscribers while Netflix is losing. But I guess, are those stats also based on paid subscribers? Because a lot of Disney Plus stuff, you just kind of get it bundled in with something, and they may be getting a fee for it, but the user isn't necessarily paying. I know, like with my Verizon subscriptions, I just get it, but I don't use it.
So I did it through Verizon, and the first year was free, and then they just tack it onto your bill. So are you sure you're getting that for free?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I will check.
My understanding is these are either paid or ad revenue supported subscribers, but the crazy thing is how high their ARPU is for the ad revenue subscribers. It's something like $6.50 a quarter per user for Hulu is one of their segments. And so, like, even if they're not actually physically paid, it's basically on par with a paid subscriber, and generally the ad revenue per user increases over time and has been. And so, I mean, it's an incredibly large business, and really impressive that they just spun this up in a couple of years.
There's no question about it. Totally.
Cool.
Well, we have one more story to cover today, and it's a fun one.
Do you want to cover this one? Okay.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. All right. This one's quick. We'll cover this quick, and we can get on to our main interview. This is a New York Times article entitled "WeWork's Adam Neumann Gets Backing from Andreessen Horowitz." Here's a quote: Neumann's new company Flow wants to transform the residential real estate market. Notably, it has financial support from Andreessen Horowitz, the preeminent Silicon Valley venture capital firm that was an early investor in everything from Facebook to Airbnb. The backing of Andreessen Horowitz, considered royalty among early-stage investors, is a powerful sign of support, and perhaps a rebuke of Neumann's critics, who have described his leadership at WeWork as a cautionary tale for corporate hubris. Andreessen Horowitz is investing $300 million in Flow. So, this is like the most popular story of Schadenfreude that I've ever seen. There's We Crashed, which is a great show on Apple TV Plus, which I definitely recommend watching because it's really, really fascinating if you're interested in Silicon Valley. But you take a step back and think about what WeWork is. It's fundamentally a great product. When I think about if I go to a new city, I need a place to work. I don't go to a coffee shop. I look up the closest WeWork, and I pay $29 and I get a place for a day. And it's great. It's a huge amount of value. And additionally, Adam created a huge amount of value for his early shareholders at the expense of SoftBank. So these guys who invested early in him made a killing. And then, last but not least, because he got the huge cash out from WeWork, he was then able to buy a bunch of residential real estates, and he's building a product where he is the first best customer. Basically, so when I'm very confident you basically need all the best businesses such as Amazon have a first best customer of themselves. So I'm like fairly bullish that this is going to be successful. And there's many issues with him, as we'll, I'm sure, discuss, but I mean, it's not crazy that Andreessen Horowitz made this investment. What is crazy, it's their largest single investment they've ever made,
right?
Which is in an early stage startup, which is wild. Anyway, what do you guys think? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's $1 billion valuation, right? So they basically own 35% of the company out the gates, which is pretty crazy. I think your take is pretty spot on, Xander. I mean, the gut reaction when you read this is to laugh, right? Because like, how could they be so foolish, like betting on Adam Neumann again after everything we saw? But yeah, when you actually zoom back, I fully agree. Like WeWork's, you could say the company was wildly overvalued and mismanaged, but they had a great idea and a great product underlying that. So I do think that there's a version of this where there's a redemption arc for Adam Neumann, and I think there's just as equal odds that this becomes the sequel to We Crashed, and just sort of like how did these VCs get taken for a ride again? Anyway, any thoughts on your end?
Yeah, I mean, look, Adam is a phenomenal promoter, marketer, and I think whatever came out of WeWork, the good and the bad, I mean, his skills in marketing and promoting it have just become next level in that, and that's what the investment is in. I'm not too familiar with actually what exactly he's doing with Flow. Everything I keep reading is just revolutionize the housing industry, but how specifically, et cetera, seems to be in
So
short supply.
I
Do you
mean,
guys know?
high level, my understanding of where they are at right now, I think it's about 3,500 apartments in Florida that he has purchased.
Mhm.
And he's looking to do some like sort of reimagining of what it means to be a renter. And if I had to place some guesses just based on his history and what he did with WeWork, I would imagine that there's some focus on sort of like communal living, shared resources, shared spaces in these apartment complexes, but I haven't seen that level of detail on it, and I haven't seen like the pitch deck for it. But yeah, the core underlying asset is Adam bought 3,000-ish apartments in Florida and is going to do
Right.
something Adam-y with them.
Well, and think about what they did. It was an incredible brand developer, right? And so, but I think part of the bet, and maybe this isn't all of it, is that they'll be able to brand housing as like Flow housing, and they'll have an
Right.
expectation. You go into Flow housing, it's high quality. The same way Disney has, you go to Disney, you expect a certain level of quality. You get Apple products, a certain level of quality. You go to WeWork, it's a certain level of quality. I think that there isn't a ubiquitous housing market, a ubiquitous player in the real estate market that has a comparable brand. So I mean, it seems like it could inherently make them.
I think that's spot on, right? It's just the brand building prowess that he's bringing that they're investing in, and is that worth whatever is post or pre 1 billion? Like, probably,
We'll see.
Yeah, and you touched on a good point, Xander, that didn't call out. Like a part of what they did share about the vision is the idea of an expectation of a certain experience and quality level. And I could see this particularly appealing to, higher income level people that like have residences in certain cities of just like, yeah, I have my Flow apartment in 4 different cities across the world, and I don't even need to see it to complete the transaction because I know what I'm getting. I know what my experiences is going to be there. It's interesting. I wouldn't rule this out or laugh it off.
There's a lot of backlash on social media. Anyway, let's move on to our main segment. We had quite a bit to cover where we will be talking about retention marketing in games. We have a great guest to talk about that. So Manu, just to start us off, will you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, what Snapyr is, and what you're doing there?
Yeah, sure. So my background professionally has been pretty much my entire life in games and gaming. By gaming, I mean real money gaming, mostly online casinos, poker, sportsbook, and like. I got started back in 1995 to date myself. Ended up building what was the world's second ever online casino at that point. And I've just stayed in the industry in one form or the other as a either entrepreneur, investor, executive. I love the space. But along the way, kind of, if you look at where I spent my time, a significant part of that was spent on what we call these days as retention marketing, right? For me, it was just kind of common sense at that time. Like, I'm paying all this money and doing all this work to get these players. Like, let's keep them. And what can we do? And I was still writing code back in those days. And so, the thinking went beyond just kind of simplistic email campaigns and things like, okay, let's look at this pattern of this guy who loses 5 times in a row on blackjack, and each time he's chasing his losses because he's stepping up his bets. And let's look at the retention of that type of cohort. And we see like, oh, that's kind of low, right? So maybe before he does his 5th bet or his 3rd bet, where he's likely to enter that low retention cohort, we can take some kind of intervention, right? And that can take many different forms. And that gets into experimentation, A/B testing. So things were phenomenally interesting to me from that point of view. It was a slow process because you custom code all this stuff and build it yourself, right? So over the years, whatever I've been involved in as investor or executive, that's always been the focus that I brought to the table, which is, hey, how do you keep what you got? These days, I'm part of India's largest gaming company. It's called Games 24/7. We recently achieved unicorn status. It's a company that operates in skill-based gaming. So we have RummyCircle.com, which is the largest real money rummy game in the world. And then also my 11th circle, which is fantasy cricket. So cricket, the sport cricket it's probably the biggest religion in India, to be frank. And so retention marketing there is also a huge component of that. We ended up building a platform in-house to take all this very complicated stuff of how do you actually create and design retention campaigns and just make it a do-it-yourself platform for our retention marketers. The idea was, how do we turn the regular marketer into a superhero, right, without engineers? We were blown away by like what came of that. Literally, we grew our business by 50%. This is off a multi-$100 million revenue base. And that led to like, well, wait a minute, maybe this stuff ought to be like its own spin-out business and we can apply it to the rest of the gaming industry. So that's how Snapyr was born. And this has been my focus for the last couple of years, and hopefully for the next 10 years to come.
Thanks, Manu. I wonder, maybe before we go deeper here, zooming out a bit and sort of agnostic of Snapyr's specific technology, when anyone working at a game company is thinking about retention marketing, I mean, the things that come to mind for me are, live ops, paid re-engagement marketing, cross promo potentially, email marketing. I guess just you being very focused in the space, like what are all the levers that are kind of within that scope? And then from there we can probably drill deeper into Snapyr.
That's an awesome question. Yeah, I mean, so all the things you said are definitely part of it, but there's also more, right? So the more part gets into so many different things. So for example, let's take a simple use case. A player downloads your game app, but doesn't do the bare minimum D1 actions that you want them to. So now what are you going to do about it to nudge them and engage them before they churn off, right? And there might be 5 different actions that you think might work. Which one works best for this player? How do you run that experiment, etc.? All of that becomes part of that campaign. And that's kind of on the simpler side. Here's a more complicated example I'll give you right from our Rummy Circle app, which has got like 30 million monthly active users. So in the game of Rummy, which is based on Gin Rummy, there's, like we have in poker, you can fold. It's called something else in Rummy. But if you're folding poorly, you lose a lot, right? Just as you can imagine in poker. So detecting when people are poor folders and then giving them educational content to say, dude, you shouldn't be doing this, like you're losing games unnecessarily, but here's some real-time content on how to be a better folder. That had a huge impact on our retention and hence LTV from those players, right? So that involved a lot to pull off things like that. So that was a example of sort of simplistic to complex, and there's a million things in between. At every stage of the player life cycle, there are opportunities to further engage them through all types of content, right? Whether it's educational content, motivational content, like, hey, here's the leaderboard and you're not on it, or you're at the top of it. High performer stories like, hey, Warren just won the jackpot. You could have too, but you didn't play. Invite them to tournaments and stuff. So there's a lot, to the world of retention marketing.
So one of the Warren listed off a bunch at the top, but I think what you're also talking about is really key to this is like it's integrated deeply into the product itself, right? And I think that's the part that we sort of skimmed over quickly, is there's all these external marketing channels, but really key to this is retention marketing largely happens in the product itself. And it sounds like maybe Snapyr is helping to make those tools easier to use. Is that like
I think
fair assessment?
That's broadly right? There's a lot of data being thrown off as exhaust from what players are doing in the product. And that data can tell you a lot about, hey, what's the predicted churn potential of this person? And then it can help inform like, hey, what's the intervention I can take or the stimulus I can give them to positively affect that predicted churn, right? And how do you do that? It could be through communications, within the app, through various in-app channels. It could be through push notifications. It could be through retargeting on Instagram or something else. Those are also experiments that need to be run. But the core thing is like, hey, this particular guy looks like has a high propensity of churning based on the data signature I see. Now, what do I do about it? How can the platform help me figure out a good idea and take advantage of that and execute it quickly and easily? And I don't take months to like bring this thing to life. You know?
Yeah. So I guess there's a few components to there, and we can dig into all of them. Let's talk about what specifically Snapyr does. And one of the things that you just talked about, which I'm curious if the product does out of box or if it needs to be configured, is like you talked about how you have a churn signal that sort of becomes the core of a lot of these other activities. How much of that is built into the product native? Talk about what Snapyr is at a high level, and then how much of that churn signal is built in natively, and how much of that needs to be built by a sophisticated marketer or even not a very sophisticated marketer in order to understand sort of how to trigger all these downstream events.
That's a great question. Let me start by kind of saying what's the vision for Snapyr and then where we are today, right? Because we're literally just coming out of the starting gates. So the vision for Snapyr is, I think, got two important elements. Number one is the actual mechanical process of like coming up with an idea for a campaign and then getting it coded and building it and executing it. It's super expensive and time consuming. Our own marketers at Games 24/7, they would have hundreds of ideas in a year, but they could only get a dozen or 2 dozen live because of the effort involved. So part of it is, hey, how can we allow marketers to build these campaigns entirely on their own? And, you know, we've spent a lot of research on talking to marketers from, you know, just indie game developers up to guys like King.com and you know, such a wide variety of campaigns. Kind of said like, man, these guys need to learn how to code. Obviously, that's not going to happen until an idea struck us, which was, I don't know if you guys ever saw this kids programming language from MIT called Scratch.
I've built Scratch when I was learning to program. Yeah.
All right, very cool. So we studied that. It's a visual no-code drag and drop language. So why can't we build this for marketers? Built a prototype, took it back to all these same guys and said, hey, if you could build your campaigns with this, would that make your life easier? I mean, ubiquitously, the answer was like, can I have this tomorrow? Right. So that really motivated us. The second part of our vision is that, well, you can build the campaigns quickly and easily. That has value, of course, but we want you to build campaigns that actually deliver positive ROI, right? And so now we need to give you these churn signals. We need to give you, before you click run on your campaign, we need to give you a predicted impact. Like, hey, this campaign is going to have a, you know, super positive predicted impact on your LTV, or dude, this campaign is going to get you fired, right? You know, so before you hit run, not afterwards, right? That's the hard stuff, and that's also the fun stuff. But it's sort of first things first that, you know, we just finished the platform. We came out of starting gates on July 1st. We've already got clients on the platform. And as we build up that roster of clients and accumulate data, then we can start bringing all these additional algorithms and data science to bear to allow them to build smart campaigns, right? So that's where our vision is. But over the next couple of years, we see all of that play out.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, that's super helpful. And I'm exploring your website, Manu, as you're describing this, and I think I think one other, just to go a little bit deeper here, if you could describe just sort of like the typical high level, what is the user experience of using Snapyr as a hub to run your re-engagement marketing, and just give like a little like slice of life of what an end user's experience is intended to be like.
Sure, I give you an example from some of our, you know, early clients that we have now. You know, so a very common type of campaign people want to run is something we call D1 nudge, right? That player hasn't done what you want them to do in the first 24 hours or so, and now you want to nudge them. But the variations around this are endless, right? So, and you know, every client we've had so far has been attracted by the promise that, hey, we don't need to deal with our engineering team or bother them. They're doing feature work, they're fixing bugs, like leave them alone, right?
It's just 3 lines of code, yeah.
Yeah, but it's 3 lines of code when it comes off the backlog and they can work on it. Then it goes out with the next app update, which might be in a month or 2. And then guess what? The app update is out and you're like, oh, dude, I got a change request, right? And so it's a never-ending process. With Snapyr, we take a little bit of time, which means literally hours, and the use of the blocks to our early campaigns. Eventually, these will also become tutorials and things, but we're early in that process, a little bit of white glove at this point. people learn the language super quick, and then they're using these blocks to go and assemble the rules and logic for their campaign. It's literally, to me, who's a former programmer, like writing code, but they don't think of it that way. They're like, this is what I was thinking in my head, and it represents my mental model, right? And once it's up and running, they hit run, no changes needed to the app. The app does integrate our SDK, so there is an integration up front. And these campaigns are data-driven, right? So it's based on what the users are doing real time in the app or not doing. And they start getting analytics right off the bat that, hey, how's this campaign actually performing with respect to what your objective was? So most of these campaigns, it takes them anywhere from minutes to the super complex ones, a couple of hours to put together. And that's bringing down like the time to market by minimum 1 order of magnitude, right? So that's the value prop right now.
Makes sense. Yeah, so there are a few components of this, and the way I'm thinking about sort of my next line of questioning is, how do we think about the key components of retention marketing in the context of someone who's like running a growth team? And so there's a few questions I have here. One is like, obviously the privacy restrictions are increasing, so and that is making the efficacy of UA and top of funnel growth marketing decline. So it seems to be a good time to be a retention marketer. How are you seizing the opportunity? How are you seizing that opportunity? And like specifically, how are you making sure that people who are user acquisition marketers or growth marketers generally are seeing the value of the retention marketing? What are the mechanisms you have? You talked about a little bit at the top, but sort of how should a growth marketer who's a full cycle marketer think about how retention marketing can increase the productivity of their users? And but really tactically, what are some of the tactical things you can show them to say, hey, we're actually driving more revenue per user? Did that make sense?
I think so. Yeah. Let me take a crack at that. I mean, so one thing is that has just been, even though we just launched the product recently, while we're in beta, we were at a bunch of trade shows from GDC and Pocket Gamer and Mal Vegas. Talked to a whole bunch of gaming CMOs and, let's say 150, 200 CMOs, and got a pretty consistent answer from all of them that, hey, retention is kind of the new acquisition, right? It's like, oh yeah, this is what I've been thinking about, is how do I focus on retention? And I need to hire people for this. What do I need to do exactly? So I think it's coming right from the top, right? That, hey, retention is important. And then the other people in the organization, someone who's specifically focused on UA, I think they also, they're not opposed to it, obviously. Like, they immediately see the value if the players they bring in are sticking around. That's they're delivering more LTV to the organization, so they're getting credit for that. That goes back to, they get a bigger budget to spend, right? So I bring in a player, and the player was going to have an LTV of X dollars, but now we've invested in retention, and he's got $2X LTV. Well, that comes back and gives me a bigger budget, to go back. So it's a win-win all the way around. And so from that side also, I'm seeing more openness towards it. But it's early. I think the community of gaming as a whole, real money gambling, I would say, is more sophisticated in retention marketing, partly because the cost of acquisition can be super high, like $500 to $1,000 and sometimes $1,500 a player. So they've learned very quickly that the mobile gaming community is starting to see those costs and complexities go up. So I see them going through that same curve and saying, yeah, we got to get into this stuff too, right? And the process has begun, like, as the last few years. So yeah, I think there's a lot of motivation now, and the question is going to be, so what can help me actually realize this opportunity in the most easy and effective way? I don't know if I got all of your question there, Xander.
Well, the other piece is like,
yeah.
We do obviously all of our work is based off data, right? And so, as someone who's like trying to think about growth marketing holistically, are there specific data points? I mean, that you look at when you're trying to build these models? How much of that flows through back into the way that you're able to report on campaigns? And then how is it possible to then roll that up to like a higher level LTV model or some sort of higher level buying model? Right.
To put another way, if I'm the end user of Snapyr on the team, how do I show to my boss like what this is what's working, and here's how we should quantify the value of it? If you could walk us through that piece.
That's a great question. Got it. So let's look at the data model of something like Snapyr, and I think it's a data model that retention marketers would use in general. So It's at a conceptual level pretty simple. Basically, there's two things going on with users, right? One is users will have different traits or attributes associated with them. You know, hey, what level of the game are they at, or do they have a certain membership status if you have a loyalty program, etc. So you might have any n number of traits. An app like Rummy Circle's got like 300 different attributes per user. And then users are generating events, right? There's events from as simple as log in to they leveled up to they lost a game, and the events have their properties of like, you know, what was the amount of the win, the amount of the loss, etc. The combination of this data set can give you enormous insights into everything else, right? So from there, if the game developer is using like Snapyr's SDK to send this data over to the Snapyr cloud, Snapyr can then start predicting what LTVs, predicted churns, predicted retention rates, you know, on players. And then, you know, this is part of phase 2 for us. Then you start getting to the next interesting part is like, okay, well, how do I attribute that, hey, campaign number, you know, 10 is the one that's influencing these variables, and it comes down to attribution from that. But really from the app developer's point of view, it's a pretty straightforward process. You know, you integrate with Firebase or something, you start sending over your events, same deal, right? You know, you send over your events like a Kochava or something like that for attribution, except we use that all for retention and LTV purposes. And, you know, there's a trick in here though, right? You know, when it comes to attribution, like attribution of things that have a short distance is much easier. That, hey, I sent out all these messages and people clicked on them, or they tapped on my push notifications, etc. Like that's easy. But you know, that might actually be misleading, because more taps or more opens could actually lead to a lower LTV, right? What you really want to track, that's all you really should care about, is what's my LTV. But LTV is affected by so many different variables, both internal and external, that attribution becomes trickier. So that's a big balancing act, is figuring out like, hey, what am I actually measuring? What's a good proxy here? You know, so as a platform right now, we're keeping it simple and measuring the near distance things. As we collect more data and have more clients, and our algorithms can dive deeper into predicting the longer things with more accuracy, we'll take a stab at that. But that is definitely a very difficult and heavy lift problem.
Manu, to pivot a little bit, looking at your website and your client list, one thing that jumped out at me, you know, Upptic has a really heavy focus in Web3 gaming, and I saw that you guys have Splinterlands as a client. And I'm just curious if you see at a high level, is anything fundamentally different about the job of retention marketing for a Web3 product from your standpoint, or is it essentially like pretty similar best practices and similar levers being played with?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, there's no difference, right? I think it's the same across the different genres of gaming, but tactically there are differences, right? So, like I said earlier, that when you're trying to retain someone, you have to take an intervention. Like in the casino industry, a common intervention is, I'll give you a comp, right? Well, a comp in a Web3 world is an NFT, right? So if I'm a retention marketer on a Web3 game like Splinterlands, and I say like, hey, you know, Xander looks like his predicted churn volumes are increasing past my comfort zone, like, I think I need to throw this guy a comp in the form of an NFT to retain it. So how do I do that from right within a platform like Snapyr, versus now going again back to my coders and having a whole custom project for like that kind of stuff? So, you know, that's a solution that, you know, they find in Snapyr, and it's immensely valuable to them.
Yeah, I already churned out of Splinterlands, but that's fine. So it's actually a really good game. The onboarding is not great. So we're kind of close to time. So I just want to say, if we're taking a step back, and we want just one last question to wrap this up. If someone is a growth marketer but not a retention marketer, what should they be focusing on to get started? Like, what are some of the key things? Like, say, hey, we're going to spin up a retention team within our growth team, or, you know, we're hiring first retention marketer. What are the key traits that they need to focus on at first to start driving immediate value?
Yeah, I think, you know, first is data collection on your users, right? You got to find out where in the life cycle of players are you actually having attrition? Because if you don't have visibility into that, you're not going to know what to do. You're just going to be guessing. So you need to spin up some kind of solution to get that clear insight where attrition is happening. Not particularly difficult to do, but it's also not a small and simple thing. And then sometimes that also begs for the need for at least some type of data scientist on your team, right? And I see the need for that as either it's a outsourced service that you go to or an outsourced platform that's going to grow too. Once you see that and you have a clear radar screen of like, okay, hey, here's the like 45, 50 different places where I have like drop off. Now I know where I can go focus my interventions. How do I build those and run those and execute those? Then you use a platform like this, and you need combination of creative and just logic-driven marketers to kind of pull that off, because the creativity is of course important, and the touch point with the consumer, right? Is your content fun? Is it engaging, right? The logic is critical, right? Am I getting stuff? Common thing like we've seen in our data set is just timing, right? Messages are sent out at the wrong time and people just ignore them. Well, so platforms like Snapyr would use something like optimal timing, right? That, hey, I want to send this message to 50,000 players of mine, but hey, platform, you go figure out when to do it, right? So that whole more programmatic mindset starts to come into it. And I see the type of marketer also, over the coming 5-10 years start to change in terms of the skill set and mix that they bring to the equation. So for the CMO layer, they need to, or the CEO layer in a smaller shop, they need to start thinking about like, hey, how am I building out my marketing org? What kind of skills do I want to bring into the mix?
Awesome. That was, I think we could do another half an hour on this topic. So, because there's just so much to dive into, but really appreciate your insights there.
My pleasure.
We'll put a pin on that for now. Our last section is app of the week. We'll just go to Warren Forrest. Warren, do you have an app this week?
I do. It's a weird one. I usually just see like, what is the last app that I downloaded on my phone? And I almost didn't do this one, but I think it's a good excuse, but for a weird reason. So mine is Spirit Airlines, and Spirit Airlines was my most used app last week because I was traveling to see some of the team on the West Coast. This is my first time flying Spirit, which I've avoided my whole life. And I think their app is pretty good. It's actually a highly reviewed app. It's highly functional. You can do cool stuff. Like I had my TSA pre-check number wrong, but I just updated in the app and my boarding pass instantly updated. But I think Spirit is interesting to look at from a game designer and economics perspective, because it's the best implementation of free to play for the airline travel model, which is like, super low cost to have an experience, but it's not a very robust experience. And if you want to actually have like parity, you need to, you get nickel and dimed for a lot of different purchases. So I think it's been interesting to kind of study their economics a bit going into the Spirit ecosystem. But I also have a hack to give maximum value if you are flying Spirit, and I'm now a Spirit Airlines Maxi, which is you book the first class equivalent on Spirit, which is called Big Seats. And it's basically no other perks other than you get a big ass first class seat. And they're really underpriced relative to other airlines. Like I was able to basically fly quote unquote first class on Spirit direct across the country for cheaper than even a connecting flight on any other airlines. And I think it's because of their target audience. So people trying to fly as cheap as possible, so no one's buying those like slightly more expensive seats. So that's Spirit, a study in free to play economics and also how to extract maximum value from their ecosystem. Xander, do you have an app this week?
I almost did American Airlines because I also flew last week, but I was like, forget that. So my app this week is Substack. So Substack is something that I've sort of had my eye on for a while, and I haven't really dug into. But as I get increasingly disenfranchised with sort of mainstream media, I've been looking for more and more ways to keep myself educated and in tune without, educated in tune and with really high quality journalism. And so I finally took like a deep dive into Substack, and I'm now subscribed to a few of them. I'm starting to pay kind of a lot for these, so we'll see. One of the ones interesting one is this guy Bill. I don't actually know his last name, but the blog he has is called Sinoism, and it's about like what's actually happening in China from a Western perspective. So that's been really, really interesting. I'm paying $15 a month for that. Let's see how long that lasts. But Substack is really great if you want independent journalism, and Sinoism is fascinating if you are curious about China. Manu,
That's really interesting. I'll definitely check that out. Yeah, so mine is one that's been around for a bit, but I just got onto it relatively recently, and I'm hooked on it. So it's of all the boring things I could say, it's an email app called Superhuman.
nice.
And this thing is ridiculous because it's $30 a month to pay for a Gmail client, basically, either on your phone or computer. I thought I'd try it for a month, and we'll see how it goes. I'm a productivity hacker, so if I can save 5-10 minutes a day on something, like that's hugely valuable. I'm also very attuned to kind of UX and design. This thing is just unbelievable in terms of its performance and speed. So I roughly estimate that I save anywhere between 10 to 20 minutes a day processing 150 emails a day on this. That's like what, 4 days a year of my life, that that translates into, that's worth $30. And as I study it, like they've gone to great lengths to like increase that performance, and like when you think of something, the distance between your thought and executing that action and that action actually happening, it's basically less than 100 milliseconds, which is like that magic threshold in UX, right? You get under 100 milliseconds and it seems instantaneous. And so you almost kind of want to go check your email. It sounds like I'm pitching this. I have no shares in the company or affiliation with it. But yeah, it's been great. And I see myself continuing to pay them until something better comes along.
So that's been brought up a couple times in the podcast of people app of the week, especially by executives.
Probably our most picked app. So that's definitely saying something.
Okay.
Awesome. Well, we're at time. Thank you so much for joining us. If someone wants to get a hold of you or check out Snapyr, where can they do that?
Yeah, Snapyr is just at our website, snapyr.com, which is spelled SNAPYR.com. And my email is just Manu, MANU @snapyr.com. So that would be an easy way to reach me.
Yeah,
Awesome.
and I'll give you a quick plug too, Manu. For your website has a really cool, simple animation that kind of gives a good snapshot of how Snapyr system actually works. So it's worth a glance for that. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Manu. This is an area. Yeah, it's an area that's underexplored but very important for any growth marketer and game developer. So thanks to our listeners as well. As always, the podcast this week was brought to you by our team here at Upptic. Here at Upptic, we do all things to help games grow profitably. We focus on Web3, mobile, and PC games now in an expanding way as well. Everything from creative, UA, marketing analytics, and all the supporting pieces. So if you need any of that work, help in those areas, reach out to us through our website. It's upptic.com, upptic.com.
Talk soon.